All right, welcome back, everyone, for another episode of Uncontested. My name is Rob Johnson, and I am your, we'll call it a special guest host this week. And joining me is the man behind the show, Sean Lohman. What's going on, my friend?
Not much. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm doing pretty good. I am
Good.
doing pretty good. Just
Good.
another Wednesday.
Yeah, I hear you. I was telling you before we came on the show that I had an interesting thing that happened to me yesterday, and I thought I would share this with everybody and base our show off of this. My stepmother, she is just a sweet lady. She comes over to my house several times a week to let my dogs out. And yesterday she came over and she left on my counter the obituaries, which I know sounds like a really strange thing to leave. She's never done that before. But there was an obituary that she had outlined in pen. And so, of course, I got home. I picked up the obituary. I couldn't help but read the one that she had outlined. And it was about an elderly lady who had died. And in her obituary, she had listed all of her pets, whether they were cats, dogs, living, dead. She listed all of her pets first in her obituary, and then listed her husband, her children, and her grandchildren. And I thought, I can kind of relate to that. And there's probably, I mean, seriously, I love my children more than anything in this world. I got 4 kids, but they're gone. They're out of the house, and my dogs are there all the time, and they're super special to me. So I started thinking about how many of my clients want and really need to make arrangements for their pets. And I would say more than half of my clients make arrangements for their pets in the form of a pet trust. So today I thought that we would spend the podcast going to the dogs and the cats and discussing what is entailed in creating a pet trust.
Yeah,
So,
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to mind when you said, hey, she mentioned, the thing that struck me the most about that story is she listed the ones that were dead as well.
Oh, she listed the ones that were dead before the ones that were alive. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, chronologically, I mean, if you're going to do it right, But what struck me is like you have all of this, your obituaries are only so long, So I wonder who got left off the list.
Right, yeah.
Really, her childhood dog from when she was 11 made the list, but cousin Vinny didn't.
Right. Well, I can tell you that she had a lot of grandchildren, but they were all listed below the pets, which, why not? I mean, which was very telling. And so I think if you step back in the estate planning process and you look at the basics of creating an estate plan, at the outset of your will or your trust, you're going to provide for the payment of administration expenses, for taxes, for debts, for all of the things that you have to take care of, funeral expenses. And that's what you do first in an estate plan. And those are just the payment of costs and expenses. And then after you provide for that, then you make specific bequests. And for example, these are items to individuals. So I want to leave my office furniture to my son, or I want to leave my cross necklace to my daughter, or I want to leave my living room furniture to my niece. So those are specific bequests. Also, specific bequests are most of the time gifts to charities. So if you're making a gift to charity, most of the time this will fall here in the specific bequest. So I want to leave X amount of dollars to my church, or I want to leave a certain amount of money to the Humane Society, specific bequest to charity. And pet trusts, leaving a sum of money to a pet trust is also a specific bequest. Then after you do that, the pool of assets that remain, so everything that's left is called your residuary estate. And that's what gets divided among your ultimate beneficiaries. So today we're talking about that second step. We're talking about those specific bequests, and particularly that specific bequest to a pet trust.
Yeah. I think a lot of people see, you might see this crazy headline from the Sun or the National Enquirer, woman leaves $1 million to her cat. And you can't do that, right?
Right. So, And a lot of times that's what, when my clients are asked this question, do you want to provide for your pets? They look at me, and the first thing I know that's coming to their minds is exactly that. Reading about the lady that's in some big high-rise apartment who's worth $30 million and has 8 cats and leaves her assets to the cats. Right. And that's not possible to do, because we cannot leave money or assets to pets, because animals cannot own property. They can't own assets. However, we can leave money, we can leave assets to care for our animals, to take care of them. And so we do that through the form of a pet trust, which simply put is naming a custodian for your pets. So naming somebody who's going to care for the pets. And then we set aside a specific amount of money to care for them during their lifetime. And so a trustee is named who will distribute that money for their care. And it could be for providing for their food, for their vet bills, for their boarding costs. And then at the end of life, the end of life care, disposition of remains, and then whatever is left at the end, it goes into that pool of assets and then to your ultimate beneficiaries. So that's in a very simple version what a pet trust entails.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might have just kind of thinking about the logistics of it. Because I know, like, for me, when I think about if something happens to me while my kids are still under 18, thinking about just the logistics of that terrify me. And then also, like, well, who's going to manage this money for the dog?
Right. Well, and the last 2 weeks, our podcast was about guardianships for our minor children. So we talked about how to select guardians, the mistakes people make in choosing guardians, and things like that. But just like we discussed in naming guardians for our kids, who are the caregivers and the custodians for our children, and the conservator for their funds, just like you said, if you decide on a pet trust, or somebody says, yeah, I want to take care of my pets, we're going to go through that same sort of process. And we're going to name custodians for the pets, and we're going to name conservators for their funds, so that we can leave the money to take care of them. And I want to state at the outset that in our planning process, this is just part of what we include in our plans. There's no extra money to set this up. This is a trust that is created through a will or through a trust that provides for this. And we do not, this is just an option in drafting your estate plan with our office. We do not charge more for this. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to name a caregiver. And you're not just going to name one, but you're going to name an alternate as well. And in considering this, you're going to think about their availability to handle a pet, or in my case, 2 pets. I've got 2 big dogs. I've got 2 golden doodles, and they're pretty good-sized dogs. When they have an invisible fence. When they go running through the yard barking, they scare the heck out of people. But they're gentle, and they would never go beyond their invisible fence. But man, these dogs are big. And so, somebody like my stepmother who absolutely loves these dogs, there's no way that she could walk these dogs at the same time. It's impossible. You also have to think about where they live. I could not leave my dogs to somebody who's living in an apartment. They're just too big. What kind of relationship that people have with your pet? So you don't want to leave the dog to somebody who's scared of dogs. You don't want to leave the dogs to somebody who's unfamiliar with your dogs. So it takes a little bit of time to figure out, who would be the best people to name, who would be the best people to name first and then second. And the reason you do that is because sometimes the first person may be having a life situation where they can't take your dog. And so you're going to do that. Now, why do we then name a conservator to handle the funds? Well, because somebody has to take care of the assets. Somebody has to take care of the money. Why? And most of the time when we do this, we're going to name the same person as the caregiver. So the caregiver is also going to be the conservator, or what we might call the trustee of the pet trust. It's too much to ask, a caregiver to go to a separate person and tell them, hey, I just spent $400 on vet costs. I need to get that money back. Or I went out of town last week and I spent $600 on boarding bills. I need to get that money back. But think about it. I mean, when we ask somebody to take care of our pets, we're putting a big burden on them potentially, right? And so when you're looking at how much money to fund this pet trust with, you got to think about that. I had a Shih Tzu. He is dead now, but he was a great dog. He went to the groomer one time, and I know it was the groomer. I never knew for sure, but he had a hole right in his eye. I didn't realize it, but he kept walking around like this, and I thought, well, something's wrong with his eye. Took him to the doctor, and then had to take them to the specialist here in town. And they looked at his eye, and they said, yeah, he's got a puncture wound in his eye. So I knew it was probably the groomer. Yeah. Well, I had to take him to a veterinary ophthalmologist. So you can see how where this bill is going.
Yep.
So I took him to the veterinary ophthalmologist, and she says, well, we'll take him into surgery. We'll take a flap. We'll pull it over the hole. We'll suture it up. He'll be in a cone. He's got to go through. He's got to have anesthesia. He's got to have several days of care here. And she said, it'll be $3,500 for this surgery. And so, I'm looking at this little dog, and he's looking at me with his eye closed. And, she said, so we'll do the surgery, as soon as you can get the bill paid. And all I said was, do you take credit cards? Because what are you going to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
So to leave that cost on somebody who is kind enough to agree to take your pets and raise them, that's a big burden to place on them. My big golden doodle, my older golden doodle, he's 5 years old. He's a sweetheart, but he has something called paniculitis. It is an autoimmune system that attacks his skin or the fat layer of his skin. He hasn't had any problems with it lately, but when he was a little puppy, he chewed a hole in his chest, and it was terrible. And so he had to have that sewn up, and he had to be on immunosuppressant medications. And I mean, I had to go to the regular pharmacist to have this prescription filled. Again, a lot of money. So you have to decide on how much money your estate is going to set aside, and how much money you think it will take reasonably to set aside to care for your pets, keeping in mind that anything that is not used, anything that's not spent, will go back to that step 3, that big pool of money that gets divided among your beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the process we go through. Do you have pets?
I do. I have one dog. He's a teddy bear. So he is a Shih Tzu Maltese mix.
There you go.
And he's a boy, and my daughter, at the age of 2, kindly named him Toto. So now when he runs and gets out of the house, and I have to go chase him, I get to run through the neighborhood yelling Toto, which makes me. I wanted Sherlock, and that was quickly shut down because she's 2, and at that point, I guess she was the boss. So
yeah, there you go. Well, so the cost of pets.
Oh yeah. He kept scratching inside of his ear, and we had to go to the vet, same thing, and they're like, it's so deep, we have to do. I think they make things up. They make up procedures to charge more. It feels like sometimes it was like $800 to get his ear squared away.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Somebody says you have to plan on every quarter. It's about $300 or $400 for a pet, with the vaccinations and keeping them up with all their checks and things like that. So, and I think that when people come in and they hear about a pet trust, they're very excited because people love their pets. I mean, well more than 50% of my clients end up doing a pet trust, and they're very excited about it. But where they have difficulty is funding the trust. How much to spend on funding a pet trust. Now, you don't fund the trust today. You don't fund the trust while you're living. The trust doesn't get funded unless you have pets at the time of your death. And that's when the trust goes into effect. So you don't spend anything today. You're just reasonably guessing how much you would need for your pets down the road. So, we ask them to think about how expensive it is to maintain a pet. And a lot of people know. A lot of people have been through the things that I have. I mean, those are only 2 of my dogs. But most people have had their dogs spayed or neutered. They know how much that costs. They do pay to have their dogs vaccinated. Some people have put in an invisible fence. They know how much that is. And if your caretaker needs an invisible fence, then guess what? That's what this helps to do. So you think about vet bills, boarding costs, food bill, emergency bills as they age, and of course, end-of-life care and disposition of remains. And I would estimate that on average, people are putting about $7,000 per pet into their pet trust. I had one lady who had one dog. She put $20,000 aside. She did not want to be a burden, and she did not want her pet or pets who might be alive at the time to in any way be a burden on her niece who she was relying upon to care for her pets.
Now, when you have somebody who's so obviously the person that is managing the finances can be different than the person taking care of the pet, correct?
Absolutely, it can be. And if you want safeguards in place, that's perfectly fine. It just depends on how easy you want that to be for the caretaker.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at with my question is like, what is the approval process look like? Is it different for everyone? So if my aunt leaves me her dog, but I got to go to my other aunt to get permission for this invisible fence, is it like an approval process? Is this something that has to be itemized and pre-written out ahead of time?
You would just present your receipts that you had spent, or you would go in advance and say, I need to get this to care for the pet. And the trustee or the conservator of the funds would issue payment for that. This is a very loose system as far as this pet trust. Now, the ultimate beneficiaries can always request an accounting. They can always step up and say, hey, conservator or hey, trustee, could you give us an accounting of what's in this pet trust and what things have been spent or what items have been paid for out of the pet trust? And the conservator or trustee, I use those terms interchangeably, has to do that. According to the terms of your trust, they have to provide an accounting to the ultimate beneficiaries. So knowing that, I think it keeps everybody sort of in line. But if you have trust in the person that you're leaving, if you're leaving it, the pet, most people end up naming one of their children or a niece or nephew or a very good friend as the caretaker of their trust. In that case, most of the time they're going to allow that person to also be the conservator or the trustee over those assets.
All right, Sean. So when we look at the family dynamics, anytime you're leaving a pool of money to somebody for something, for some reason, maybe it's just because of my family, I always think of like it's going to be almost like a Knives Out type situation where, like there's a lot of infighting. And the thing that surprised me the most of what you said is that over 50% of the trusts that you set up contain a pet trust. To me, I would have thought it was much, much lower.
No, people, they want to take care of their pets. Now, that said, I do have people that will look me square in the eye and go, I don't care what happens to the dog. It's usually one spouse over the other. But I would say about half the time they are on the same page and say, yes, absolutely, we want to provide for this pet. And if, let's say you have 2 children and you want to leave funds to these 2 children, whether it's in trust or whether it is outright. But let's say that you're creating a trust for your 2 children so you can protect those children and their assets from bankruptcy, from creditors, from judgments, from potential ex-spouses. So we're going to leave it in trust for these children. And then you think, oh, well, my daughter loves my dogs more than my son, so I want to give her both dogs. Great. So the dogs go to your daughter. Her assets are in trust. Suddenly, you have burdened her with thousands of dollars in expenses. And she may not be able to take the money out of her trust. If she's allowed to take the money out of her trust for her health, education, maintenance, and support, there's nothing in there about dogs. So, she's being asked to expend her own funds, or if she is allowed to touch her trust funds, then she's spending her inheritance on your dogs. So why not take $5,000 or something out of the overall pool of money in your estate, set it aside, let her expend that for the dogs so it's not coming out of her own pocket, and then it goes back into the pool and is divided between the two children once the pets have died and she's finished with the trust. So it's not where people fight over things or anything like that. Usually couples come in and they are in agreement. Certainly if you have one person who comes in, their pets are even more important to them, because that's when pets are really companions. I mean, I feel like that. My kids are out of the house. My pets, I spend more time with them than I do my kids, right? I mean, my kids are all over the country. California, Texas, Lexington, Kentucky, and here in Louisville. And so, they're home for holidays. They're home every now and then. But my dogs are there all the time. Right. So do I want to take care of them? Heck yeah. I know who would be the caretaker of them, and that would be my youngest daughter. But I sure don't want to burden a 21-year-old with the cost of these dogs. So do I provide for them? Yes. And, that way she's not having to experience that burden financially of trying to support these dogs on her own.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like to kind of the fairness angle, too, of setting up the pet trust, because if one of the beneficiaries is the person taking care of it, then that would kind of, create a bit of an imbalance.
Right. And that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes you don't think about that, but when I talk to people and we talk through this, then it makes a lot of sense to people, and they want to be fair. Everybody wants to be fair to their kids, their grandchildren, whoever their beneficiaries are. They want to be fair, and this is really a fair way of doing it. And I'll tell you, I don't know a whole lot of people that talk about this or bring this up to their clients as an option, but it's a great option that's out there.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, when the pet trust ends, like I said, those funds that are remaining flow over into that step number 3, where that pool of assets would be, and it just gets paid out accordingly. It doesn't hold up anything, by the way. If you're thinking, oh no, this would hold up the payment of assets. No, not at all. It just gets paid out according to the way your ultimate residuary estate got paid out.
That makes sense, and that's one thing that, for me at least, I tend to forget is like all of the contingencies. And I've listened to your podcast, obviously, and read a lot of your content and whatnot, and you're really thoughtful when it comes to contingencies and what if scenarios, which is something that I think, at least for me, kind of puts me at ease, because that lets me know that you have, you can never possibly cover 100% of the scenarios, because it's almost infinite, right? But all of the major things that could happen, it's nice to know that it's thought out. There's almost this giant hierarchy and tree, and it's almost like a choose your own adventure book, and you have pretty much every ending covered.
Well, and it's taken a long time to get there. I mean, I've been doing this for 28 years. When we first started out, we were like a lot of other lawyers, and we would say, who do you want to receive your estate at the end of the day? Do you have any specific requests you want to leave? And it would be a very brief interview, and it was us just asking them, who do you want to have this? Who do you want to have that? So what it is now is we play through a lot of scenarios with our clients. And we'll say, well, what happens if you leave pets, for example? Or what do you want to happen if a child, God forbid, were to predecease you? What do you want to happen? And people, every single time I'm doing a planning session, which is what we call it, whenever I'm doing a planning session, how many times my clients say, I never thought of that. I never thought of that. Well, of course you didn't. That's my job. And it takes 28 years of experience sometimes to get to that point where you feel like you've seen it all. And so you know the different things that could happen, and things that could happen that could have a real detrimental effect on this couple or this individual and their family. And so we do play that out a lot, and we do try to bring up all the potential contingencies that are out there so people can make informed decisions. And keep in mind that these plans that we're doing, they are not fill-in-the-blank plans. These plans are tailor-made for the individual that's sitting in my office at the time. And so that's why, we bring up these pet trusts. If people are saying, well, I never heard of this. Nobody ever mentioned this to me. I've got an estate plan in place. Nobody ever talked about this. Imagine the other things that you may not have been asked about.
Yeah.
The other contingencies that are out there that you may not have been made aware of. So, we review people's plans for free. I'm glad to do that for people and sit down with them and see what things we have to offer that could make their plans better. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about living your life, feeling comfortable, knowing that everything is taken care of and in order. And that's what we do.
That's huge.
Yeah.
One question I'm curious about as I'm sitting here kind of listening to all of this is what do you think is your average client's biggest hurdle to actually coming in and getting an estate plan finished?
I think there are a couple of concerns that clients have. I think one concern is that talking about it will hasten it. And I'm talking about death.
Absolutely.
And I've done this for a long time, and I can tell you there is zero correlation between doing your estate plan and having something happen to you. But I think that is a very real concern, and I've heard people say that if I talk about this and I have this done, it's going to make it happen. And so I just put it in the back of my mind, and I don't worry about it. The second is the cost. I think people worry about the cost. But we do not do estate planning for anybody where it's not going to save them money in the long run or save their estate money. If I cannot save your estate money, I don't do planning for you. And so, that's why we walk through the process with them during our planning session, and we see, how can we save money here? How can we save money on your estate? Going back to that first one, I had a real estate agent call me last week, and she was referred to me by another attorney. And she said, I am in a desperate situation. Some clients of mine are getting ready to close on a house. They're getting ready to sell their house. And one of them has to have emergency surgery. One of the couple has to have emergency surgery. And so they don't have they have no plan in place. They have no power of attorney. They have no living will. They have no HIPAA release. Of course, they have no will or trust in place. But these ancillary documents, they had nothing in place. Can you help us? And of course, I'm going to help them. And so we ended up this was on a Thursday afternoon. I ended up the next morning in the hospital, in the hospital room right before they took this individual for surgery. It was a brain surgery, by the way. Right before they took this individual for surgery, having her sign her power of attorney, because they needed to be able to close on these properties. They didn't know what sort of condition she was going to be in after the surgery. And so we needed to get all of this taken care of. This is the sort of burden that gets thrust upon families when they don't plan. And so I know that there are concerns that it's going to make, hasten things or the cost, but I spend a lot of time easing concerns in our family wealth planning sessions. And I think that my clients would tell you that they feel very comfortable and that they feel better moving forward because we've shown them how we're going to save them money and we're going to take care of all those things and those people that are important to them.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting thing to hit on as well as we move to wrap up here is like, for me personally, I don't know about everyone else. Someone might be like, no, you're crazy. It's absolutely a big part of estate planning. Saving money is not even on my radar when I think about estate planning. Like I know like for me, it's more of the organizational aspect of keeping my affairs in order when I die. Like the fact that it would be more expensive or that burden would be pushed to somebody else wasn't even like, I don't know why it's not for me, but that makes so much sense when you're walking through the benefits of it. And I love when he said, if you can't save them money, like no reason to do it,
Well, absolutely. I mean, I will tell you that particularly in our state, and I'm going to add the surrounding states, going through the probate process, which is what you go through if you do not have an estate plan in place, or even if you have a will in place, going through the probate process is incredibly time-consuming and incredibly expensive for your estate. It comes out of the pockets of your spouse, your children, and your grandchildren. So when we look at the overall cost of probate, we are saving people oftentimes tens of thousands of dollars. I am not kidding you. Tens of thousands of dollars in spending a few $1,000s on doing estate planning up front. So it is so beneficial to people to sit through a planning session and to see whether or not it makes sense to do an estate plan.
That's awesome. No, that's super helpful for me, Sean. I appreciate you walking me through all that stuff, especially on the pet side, because when I feel like when you say that to people, sometimes they're like, well, that doesn't seem very logical at all to have a pet trust. And then when you talk about, it could lessen what you actually get or what you actually are able to give your beneficiaries. Right. Like it makes a lot of sense. So I'm hoping that the listeners kind of dial into that and get a hold of you so you can walk them through all of the fine particulars of it.
Right. And I would just, if anybody wants to meet with us, go to our website, LohmanEstatePlanning.com. There should be a link in the notes, and you can schedule there. You can schedule a 15-minute phone call with me. You can schedule a family wealth planning session. If you want to learn more about general estate planning, you can go to my website and you can attend a 23-minute webinar, which gives you a really good overall view of estate planning. And, in our podcasts, we're trying to focus in on specific aspects of estate planning. The webinar sort of gives you that overall view. And so I really encourage people to do that and to make an appointment and come in. Come in and we'll go over everything, and it doesn't cost you anything.
Excellent. Well, Sean, it's always a pleasure, my friend. I appreciate you walking me and the listeners through all of that today.
Well, it's great to have you. I mean, Joel moved on to bigger and better things, I suppose, and we are glad to have you with us. So, yeah, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Just personally for the educational benefit for me.
Sure.
All right, Sean. Well, I appreciate it. All right, listeners, that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Uncontested. Be sure to tune in on the next episode, and we'll see you there. Take care.